Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Parents Can Help a Child Who Has Speech and Communication Difficulties Using the Colorcards Apps. First of all, I just want to run through some housekeeping items. This is a chat-based webinar only, so you can only enter questions in the chat box on your screen. We will attempt to answer the questions as we go, either in the discussion or in the chat box in reply to you. But please let us know if you have questions along the way. If you have any technical difficulties, please also alert us and we can see in the chat box and try to resolve those for you. This webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to review it later or share it with colleagues as required. So, welcome to the webinar. My name is Rebecca Bright. I'm a speech and language therapist and I have the pleasure today of talking you through some ways in which parents can help children with different communication difficulties by way of using the Colorcards apps. But before we get started, I wanted to run through some questions with you. First of all, some questions are going to pop up on the screen. It'd be good to know who is in the room. So if you can give us an idea about who is here, and that will also enable me to tailor the presentation accordingly, but gives us some useful insights as well. Great, so I can see everybody's answering that at the minute. Okay, great. So we know that the majority of people are speech and language therapists and parents who are here as well. So that's great. Next question I wanted to ask you is how many of you are using iPads when working with children? Great, so everybody's quickly voting on that. So it looks like about 3/4 of people have used iPads with their students or children before. A couple more questions. Now, of those that use iPads, how many of you have bought apps before? Okay, again, so slightly more people have bought apps rather than those that haven't. And two quick last questions. How many of you have heard about Colorcards before? Great, so it's really 50-50, which is good. And if you had heard of them, how many of you have used the apps before? Okay, so some of you have used them, but certainly not everybody, so that's great. So I will make sure that today's webinar is a good overview as to the apps and a good understanding as to how they all work. Great. Before we start, one of the things I wanted to mention is that we have a very, very special offer just for the next 24 hours that you can buy any of the 5 apps for just $1.99, or that's £1.49. So that's a massive discount that's available at the moment. So I encourage you to take advantage, and that's, as I said, limited time only. So please make sure that you do that. Right. So on to the agenda for today. The plan for today is to look at how we use apps for speech, language and communication goals. And then to use Colorcards Apps really as a case example for this topic, and have some ideas discussed about how you can use the Colorcards Apps to address some of the speech and language goals that your child or your student might have. Then to go into a bit more detail and talk about how we can personalise content in these apps, and then look at how to track and measure progress. So as I said, if you have questions, please ask them as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them. And if we can't get back to you during the webinar, we'll certainly respond afterwards. So just recently, I did a survey of 139 speech language pathologists or speech therapists, depending on where you are, and asked them about using apps for speech and language therapy. And more specifically, I asked them about which area of their practice they were using apps in. And the two areas really where therapists were using apps the most were for both speech-based goals and language-based goals. So just to be clear, so speech goals based on how the speech sounds and the sounds that somebody's using, and the language-based goals, so the structure or the grammar that somebody's using. Less were using it, but still a significant number, 30%, I think, still quite a high number, were using apps for speech and language therapy goals related to cognition, and 19% were using them for other areas other than speech, language, or cognition. So perhaps pragmatics, literacy, or other areas that they identified outside of the term speech, language, and cognition. So as you can see, a lot of therapists are currently integrating apps into their practice. So why might parents want to use apps? So we know that therapists are, and they're definitely using it in their practice. One of the big reasons I think parents might want to use apps is because it will facilitate continuation or carryover of the goals from speech therapy sessions. Now, as a therapist, sometimes it's difficult to, or parents and family members are really, really keen to continue on the work that you've been doing in between sessions. And I think in recent years when apps have been available, it's been a really clear-cut way for therapists to give materials that are engaging to parents to be able to use with their child outside of their regular speech therapy sessions. I hear quite often about parents using apps during longer breaks from speech therapy, for example, over the summer holidays, for practice, when parents might be home more than others, or have more chance to spend time at home with their children. Parents might want to use apps because game-based learning is often more enjoyable for children, but also sometimes for parents. And I think one really nice reason that parents might want to use app is because it can then be speech therapy tasks then move from being a worksheet or a book of work to being something that the whole family can participate in. Younger siblings or older siblings might be wanting to play the games that form some of the practice tasks that a speech therapist might set, or that the therapist has identified would be great tools to use. And as I said, because sometimes it feels like speech therapy practice is homework, and that's not always an attractive option for some of our students, or for some of the some parents as well, as I well know. So we need to make sure that the work that we pass on to parents is engaging, and that students are motivated to do it. And I think that's at the core of why sometimes apps have really made an impact in the speech therapy industry, is because what I think we're all observing is that in general the use of apps is highly motivating for a number of our clients. Another reason I think parents might want to use apps is because more and more we're all using smartphones or have tablets at home where possible. So it's sometimes easier than, for example, logging into a website or having to use other resources. But I'd be happy to hear other suggestions as to why parents might find apps more useful than say, other materials. So that's why speech therapy tasks are often great to do on an iPad, both from clinicians and parents' perspectives. But what are some of the practicalities and some of the issues that I think we need to consider? And you're probably not going to think any of this is rocket science, and it's not, but some of the issues that I think we need to be aware of and can't ignore are that there is an ongoing debate about screen time, about how much time children are watching TV or using tablets. I'm sure everybody has their own feelings about that. But, I think, as with anything, and most speech therapists would probably echo this recommendation, is that you would expect, and as a parent, you would make your own judgment about what was suitable screen time, just as you would with any other activity that your child was doing. One of the key changes, and I think one of the ways, for example, Apple has responded to the very high-profile use by children of iPads and some of the issues they had with children downloading hundreds of pounds of apps, is by implementing a lot of opportunities to add restrictions. So, for example, restricting access to YouTube or the App Store is possible now on iPads and on other tablets. And you can also do things, for example, in the accessibility settings to make sure that the child stays in the app, so that they're not accidentally wandering into another app that they shouldn't be in, or that they're getting distracted away from the app that they should be using, that you're wanting to use in your targeted practice. I think there are practical issues around how we share what happens, for example, in the clinic versus what happens at home. And a lot of the speech therapy specific apps now are building in ways that reports can be either emailed out or shared from one device to another. And that's really helping overcome or really facilitating a way of communicating between teachers and parents. So that's really opening up another channel. And finally, one of the practicalities which seems to be an issue which doesn't go away and actually becomes more of a challenge is the need to sift through what has now become a huge number of apps on the App Store. If you look in the Education App Store alone, so on iTunes and then in the Education section, one of the biggest subsections within that are apps for speech therapy. It's absolutely an enormous industry now. And the challenge I think speech pathologists, teachers, and parents all have is sorting out good apps from bad and knowing where to spend their money and wanting to make sure that they're choosing apps which are going to stand the test of time, be adaptable, and be able to help you work on whatever goals you've set for that particular child. So I think that's one of the real issues. So here I've got a couple of tips on how you can more easily find the good apps. And I think, in my opinion, speech language pathologists and speech therapists should be recommending which apps specifically they want you to use, which complement therapy and address goals. So I think where possible, therapists should be, as part of their regular continuing education, be looking at apps to try and work out which ones are going to be suitable for each child and for each goal. That's a challenge in itself, no doubt. But one of the ways that therapists and indeed parents can do that is by looking at App Store reviews. Bear in mind, just like any reviews for TripAdvisor or Airbnb, you can only get the very positive reviews and the very negative reviews, so the 5 stars and the 1 stars. But have a look at the detail in the reviews. What is it that people find useful about the apps? What do they feel is missing? And I feel that often gives you a really good indication about how the app works for other people. Now in the App Store, when you submit an app, you have the option to upload videos, and I think that's a great way for potential customers to to see what will be a useful app by looking at an app in more detail. And of course, looking for blogs and reviews online, chatting to other parents about apps that they've found useful. So I think it really does make a difference, and it's worth the time that it takes to sift through what can feel like a mountain of apps. So moving on to the Colorcards apps, there are 5 apps in the market at the moment. They're all in the Apple iTunes store. Those apps are Everyday Objects, What Can You See? And then there are 3 apps in the sequencing range. So those 5 apps are the apps that are currently available. And they've been designed for use by multiple students, which is one of the real advantages, and designed to be used along intervention plans and very much structured to fit around speech and language therapy goals. Apologies, I'm just having a little coughing fit. Okay, so what I really wanted to get into today was ideas around using the Colorcards apps. And we're going to run through 5 specific examples on practical and real ways that you can use these apps to target speech and language therapy goals. These are meant to just illustrate some of the ideas, and hopefully you'll be able to build on those ideas and take them into your own setting or make them applicable to your child or to the student that you're working with. So we're going to look at the 5 apps here on my iPad. Bear with me for 2 seconds while we set that up. There's always a little bit of a lag time while we wait for the iPad and the computer to talk to each other. Okay, great. And I'm going to run through, we're going to start with looking at an example using the app Everyday Objects and looking at a way in which you can use the app to talk about curriculum or to look at building vocabulary using very specific and relevant content. So in the app, now I've built in and added some photos related to the curriculum area of mini beasts, say for example. So instead of, I'm able to take my own photos, or these ones, for example, being uploaded, of bugs and insects in this case, that I can then use as content for my sessions, where I'm looking at building vocabulary around curriculum areas, and in this case, as I said, around mini beasts. So using the Colorcards apps, the image comes up, and this is the Everyday Objects app. The image comes up, and the child is prompted to tell you about what's happening in the picture. So it may be that I'm just wanting the child to tell me what this item is, or to describe what they're seeing. So let's say in this example I wanted them to just tell me what it is, and they can say it's a butterfly or an orange butterfly, and that's great. And I have the option either just to listen to that and then indicate that it's right, and when I click on the tick mark, that I will see that I'm right and move on to the next picture. So here's the next one. This time, for example, what I can get the child to do is use the recording tool that's built into the app. So here I can tap onto the microphone that is in the top right-hand corner and record, this is a fly, and when I want to, then I can listen back. In my experience, this is a great way of working on some of the other skills that are really important for most of our clients, looking at self-evaluation and self-monitoring, and also listening skills. So by recording and listening back, I can hear what I said and then with the child make a judgment about whether I got that right or wrong. So that's one of the really fabulous features built into all of the Colorcards apps, which I think makes a real difference. So as you can see, I can add content relevant to a curriculum area. So it can be, in this case, as I said, bugs for mini beats, but it could be, you know, if the topic was weather, it could be images about weather, and it really can lend itself to just about any topic that you chose. So it's a very, very flexible way to use the app on a very simple goal. So that's everyday objects and how I would use it for building vocabulary. Let's say now I wanted to work on goals related to sentence structure. In that case, I'm launching the Basic Sequences app, which is one of the apps within the sequencing range. And if I wanted to work on putting things in the correct order, I would, choose one of the pictures I had available. Let me just choose that again. And I can enter any content that I wanted into that. So for example, here I've got pictures of a very familiar sequence that parents and children could use together. So I can take photos to enable somebody to work on putting that information into order. In the example of Basic Sequences then, or in the sequencing app, they shared one of the great features where you can drop and drag the pictures into the correct order, and once they're in the correct order, you'll have reinforcement that they're in the right order as well. So there we go, now they're in the right order, and then we can work on the child recording. You know, I changed the nappy, then I put on my shoes, then off I go for the day. So you can work on the narrative and the structuring skills that really benefit from having that visual structure and visual sequence sitting in behind the scenes as well. So I think there are lots of ways, I'm sure you can see as well, that how you can use a sequencing app to work on sentence structure or narrative structure very, very simply. And just as these, you can use the photos that are within the app, you can also populate these with your own photos, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. Okay, the next example I'm going to show you is a way of working on ordering information. And in this case, I've got an example we've made ourselves where we're going to put these steps in the right order. This time it's a little more challenging. As you can see in the change from Basic Sequences, we now have a 4-step sequence. And our challenge is to sequence each of the steps in the plant life cycle. Now this can really tie in nicely with topics in class, or topics that you're wanting to work on in therapy, or topics that are relevant for home. Again, it's really simple. The child is asked to just move the pictures into the right setting. And because you can upload your own pictures, either taking them directly on the phone on the camera on the iPad, or by uploading pictures that you've taken screen grabs on or found in Google Images, you really can be flexible with what's in there. The child then gets that visual reinforcement that they've got it in the right order, and if I want to work on them also being able to verbalize that sequence, we can tap on the record button and record that for them to listen back to as well. So you do have quite a bit of flexibility with how that information is set up, and the task can be made easier or more complex as you need. The next example I want to show you is looking at how you can work on some of the cognitive skills or some of the cognitive goals that a therapist might have. And I think one of the fun things about this app, which is What Can You See, is that it makes a very structured task fun. You've got an opportunity to work on things like turn taking and predicting with this app. And what happens is you've got a picture which is hidden, and you can see a little cutout And each time I tap the screen, a little bit more of that image is revealed. And so I might have the child start to guess, oh, I think it's something that's on a flower, or it's something that's pink and spiky. I can see some wings. And of course, you know, or it might be a chance for you to model some of that language that you're using, and see that. So then you've got the picture being revealed. So what can you see can be used for lots of things. But as I said, one of the areas I think it works really nicely is working on skills like attention and concentration, where the child really has to wait to see what it is that's coming. So you might be working on, you know, trying to wait and get them to only say it once they see the whole picture, for example, or modelling the thinking that goes behind some of that meta language that goes on in terms of, oh, I think it's going to be something, a baby. Let me see. Oh, yes, it is a baby. So a lot of the thinking out loud opportunities, I think, can be addressed with this app as well. And the last app I'm going to show you is in the most complex of the sequences apps, which is the sequences 6 and 8 step. And that allows you to use more lengthy sequences. And in this case, I've used it to set up some examples. Whoops, wrong one. Sorry, let me go back. Oh, I popped it in the other app actually. Sorry. Oop. In the predicting task, which belongs in each of the sequencing apps, I put it in the 4-step one. So it seems to be a bit of a lag between what I'm doing on the iPad and what's coming up on the screen. Let me try starting that again. Okay. So I go into the predicting game and I can choose how many cards I want. And the content that I built into it is looking at getting the child to problem solve about what they think is going to happen next. So in this case, here's Melanie, who works in our office, and we've taken some pictures of her, and I can say, oh, what do you think is going to happen next? Oh, well, I think Melanie's going to have a drink of water. So I can record that, and then let's see what happens next. Uh-oh, she's spilt the water. So this is a great way to work with the student to then say, what happens next? And you might be working on that child being able to ask for help. So maybe I've spilled the water, so then I ask mum to help me clean it up. Or you might be working on independent skills. I've spilled the water, so then I go and grab some kitchen towel and dry it off. So you can use it in lots of ways to promote problem solving and to promote some of the basic living skills and all those sorts of things that come into being able to predict, looking at different options. I could say, what happened if I didn't go and get the paper towel? Well, then the table would still be wet and we'd need some help. So it gives you lots of ideas on working on those really important skills of being able to verbally problem solve and be able to come up with ideas as to what to do. So a really nice example on how that happens. Okay, I'm going to flip back to the presentation. Bear with me, as I said, there's always a little lag in between moving between the iPad and back to the presentation. Okay, there we are. Oh, yep, okay. So we've looked at 5 different ways you can use the apps to work on the goals that we identified now. But you can probably see lots of ways you could use the apps to work on the goals that your child or your student is working on. One of the real benefits of the Colorcards apps, in my opinion, is the ability to personalize and customize the content. Why is this important? I think There's lots of reasons. Not only do I feel that students and clients and children often respond really well to personal content, because it's also easier to understand, but it's also, I think, more fun and engaging. And as a therapist, I feel like it allows for transfer of skills more easily. For example, if you're describing an image of the child's own bike and then you're later on talking about their bike in the garden, that's going to make a lot more sense. So I think it allows us to be more relevant, easy to understand, more fun and transferable, and often more culturally appropriate. A lot of the content in apps is fairly standard, but it allows you to cater to culturally specific food or culturally relevant clothing, for example, and make content that's going to suit each client and be very client-centered. So how do I do this? Well, I can take photos to include in the sequences or the object-based apps, so either everyday objects and what can you see, or the sequences range. There's an option of taking the photos within the apps, but you can also do things like take screen grabs or screenshots, for example, of a child's favorite characters. So for my little boy, that would be Peppa Pig, and you could have Peppa Pig in each of your pictures if you needed to. So there's lots of ways you can personalize the content that's in there, replacing the standard photo library that comes with the apps. You can also add the child's photo to the profile so that each time you use the app, their photos in the corner, and that's a really lovely way for the child to personalize the app. And of course, as you saw before, you can use the voice recording feature to record their own content, their own verbal description of a picture or a sequence, and then hear that back. So there's some really great ways that you can personalize and customize the apps for people of all ages, really. Okay, so we know how to personalize the apps, how to customize them, and how the apps work, but how do we use the apps to measure progress? Well, mostly because we're wanting to measure achievement against therapy or intervention goals, as well as, of course, client-reported outcome measures. We can use within all of the Colorcards apps, the in-app reporting feature. That enables, that automatically tracks progress within the apps. It allows you to see progress between sessions, so you can see change over time. You can also then drill deep into each session and see how somebody has done on a specific task or with a specific picture. So you can see very top level information, and you can also go down into a much finer detail as well. You've also got the opportunity you've got for example, the reporting feature, a section where you can add your own observations. So not everything when we're measuring progress is about accuracy or time taken. Sometimes the observations that we can record, such as the child had really great eye contact during this task, or the child was fantastic at taking turns, or that they really enjoyed the app. All of those observations are really important things to record, and that can go alongside each of those tasks. So you're able to record that information and enter that in the reporting feature as well. Here you can see how the reporting tool looks. That this is consistent across the apps, which makes life a little bit easier, especially if you're using more than one app. And you can see, for example, for this student here, we can see her name and her photo. This box is empty, but here is where I can enter information about the child that I want to add. And I can see progress across the 3 sessions that she did in February, for example, getting an idea of accuracy and how that's changed over time. So you need to set up a new user ID for each of the students, and you can have multiple students on each iPad. You can personalize and annotate those, and you can review each student's report one by one. So you can have a whole class a class list on there or a caseload on there and individually review each of the students' reports. One other thing I wanted to do was to show you some of the other resources that are available to use with the Colorcards apps. Here is a great table that's available on colorcardsapps.com, which allows you to see and get ideas on different ways you can use the apps to work on various areas of difficulty or target areas. So you're able to log in, and this is downloadable from the website. So you can see, for example, if I was working on thinking about the listener, I could, it's given a suggestion for a task about how I could use it with everyday objects, for example. And I could describe what I could see in the picture, but focus on all the irrelevant details, and then see if the child can work out what it is that I'm looking at. Lots of suggestions that have been put together for ways that the apps can be used with different goals in mind. So you can see there's suggestions for turn taking, for literacy related goals, and sometimes, as you can see here, it's just about using the app as a reward for other therapy, or for using the app as, you know, that last stretch at the end of a therapy session or a home practice session, to use that as a bit of a motivator, or something as a bit of a warm-up at the beginning of a session as well. So those resources are all available at colorcards.com, so you're able to access those and download those off the website. One of the other resources that I'll signpost you to is a lovely video from a child named Aidan, who's been using the Colorcards apps, and you can see how he's implementing those at home with his mum. It's a really lovely example there, so please go and have a look at both of those resources. I'm going to, one very last time, remind you of the special time limited offer where you can download any of the apps from iTunes for that very special price. So please make sure you take advantage of this tremendous saving, and as I said, very time limited, so be quick. And I'm going to leave it at that. If you've got any questions, please let me know. I'm going to be online for a little while longer, and we'll be able to answer those questions for you. I'm going to ask 2 quick questions before we close, so you can answer those as you think of your questions and type those in. So first question is, how many of you, based on what you've seen, think you might use the Colorcards apps? And good, glad to see most of you would, that's great. And then finally, if you could be so kind as to rate the webinar so that we can work on improving each of the following webinars to come. So thank you for your time. We're online now to answer any questions. Please do also let us know if you would be interested in reviewing the apps, or if you'd be interested in looking at how the apps might work in your classroom or in your setting. If you have specific questions, we're very happy to answer them. As I said, we'll be online for the next 10 minutes, so if you have any questions, do let us know. We'll be very, very happy to answer those. So otherwise, I'll thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Colorcards webinar.